Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The unbeaten New Zealand heavyweight Junior Farr says that his countryman and rival from the amateurs, Joseph Parker, the former WBO champion, needs him. He says that Joseph Parker needs him now. And the answer to that, because I know some people will immediately scoff at that, it's a little bit yes, but also it's a little bit no. And I'll get to that because context is key with the situation between Farr and Parker. They've been talking about a fight, and this is more recently, in recent months. They do have a rivalry stretching back to the amateurs. They split wins 2 apiece, but there really hasn't been a lot to build this fight. But some of what's happening now in this article that I'm about to get to with Junior Farr, it fits into the category of actually building the rivalry. Finally, they are trying to actually do that, as opposed to managers like David Higgins for Joseph Parker and Mark Cadell for Junior Farr going across in the media at each other, because that can only build the fight so far. And we know Junior Farr and Joseph Parker, nice and respectable guys. They don't talk a lot of trash, and when Joseph Parker tried to do that before with Anthony Joshua, as soon as he signed the fight with Joshua, he admitted it was all fake and he said it to get the fight done. But some of the building of a potential fight between these two has to involve the fighters actually starting to get a little bit, I don't want to say nasty, but there's got to be a bit more edge to stuff that they're saying in the media. And the Farr comments that I'll get to fall directly in this camp and help to start build that rivalry a bit more in the New Zealand media, and the public perhaps can take a bit more notice of it, because until now, no one's really been talking about this fight in New Zealand. And there's some comments to come from Junior Farr's manager Mark Cadell, which I think he's doing what he should for his guy, being a bit of a hype man, but that's some of what it is hype at this point. They've got to build this rivalry to make the sort of fight that they want and are talking about. So I'll get to the comments now and then on to some more thoughts. So Farr says to News Hub, a New Zealand publication, which previously known as 3 News, "It's kind of funny. They were talking down at me for such a long time, but now they need me. They wouldn't be making all this noise if they could go somewhere else and get paid. They need me, which is why they keep bringing me up. It's funny how the tables have turned." So I'll just dip in here before going on to some of the other comments from Farr's manager Mark Cadell. In a way, Junior Farr is actually right. Parker needs Farr to an extent, but that's because of the sort of roadmap that's been laid out by Joseph Parker and his team. Parker himself had stated earlier in 2019, after the Winters fight, that he needed 2 more fights for the rest of 2019. One of them would be a fight mid-year, possibly in New Zealand, and he wanted it to be of a certain level, and then finish the year off with a bang, with a big one at the end of the year. Junior Farr is right in the sense that Parker needs him to some extent, because that's that intermediary fight. Parker's team are looking at that as a winnable fight, but they're also looking at the dollars and cents and what is something that can make some money for all involved, but the risk is maybe lower than facing, say, a Michael Hunter, which is where a lot of fans would like to see Parker going, instead of this domestic rivalry fight with Junior Farr, which at this point seems to be way undercooked. And I have seen some people from overseas sort of saying this will be a massive fight in New Zealand. Maybe eventually, but not yet. It's not actually something that people, it's on their, the end of their lips and that sort of stuff, that people have been talking about it for years, and that it's just so burning that it has to happen next. It's not that sort of fight. Hasn't been built the right way yet. But Farr is right. Parker, if he's looking to sort of get the most lucrative type of fight at a certain level, then Farr fits that bill. He's at a place in the division right now where he's untested and relatively unproven at the top level. So Parker probably would go in a roaring favourite and be expected to win possibly by knockout, and then go on to something at the end of the year. So from Farr's perspective, he is right. Parker needs him, and that's why they keep bringing him up. But probably in the way that he sees the fight and how he thinks it's competitive and that he could beat Joseph Parker. I don't think the majority of the boxing public, as it were, sort of see things the same way as him. So when people sort of say Joseph Parker doesn't need Farr, they're right in a sense as well, because internationally, a lot of fans, this is a fight that doesn't really interest them. 95% of my audience, or 96%, is not from New Zealand, so it's from elsewhere. And when I do videos about Joseph Parker and Junior Farr, that fight, the general tenor is, why is Joseph Parker even considering this? So in one aspect, because fans want to see bigger fights for Parker, he doesn't need this fight. But in the context of his career and the way that they're mapping it out, this year in particular, say if boxing was on, they were looking to have an interim fight before a big fight. So in one sense, like Farr mentioned, they do need him, but only if the price is right. And this is where we'll get to some comments by Mark Cadell. So the article goes on to say, Farr's manager, Mark Cadell, and actually I'll just jump in here. So after my most recent video, someone purporting to be Mark Cadell came to the channel, no avatar, just sort of saying David Higgins was making a lot of a noise and, being a bit sort of disingenuous with his comments. I'm paraphrasing here, just sort of summing it up, and that no offers had been made. But I did mention to him that Head said publicly that if Parker gets $2 million under his DAZN deal, Head stated publicly that Farr should get $1 million, or 1/3 of the pot, which is what people are reacting to, because Higgins, as I said to this Mark Cadell avatar, which I can't verify if it was him or not, I think it probably is, but Higgins is using Cadell's statements against him. And in this article, he is actually mentioning it again. So he's told NewsHub they want 1/3 of the total purse, with Parker reportedly making $2 million a fight. Cadell believes that his charge should be valued at about New Zealand $1 million, given his undefeated record and current ranking. Cadell says the fight could be the first big global event after coronavirus lockdown and believes that it should drive the television rights price up, and they want a piece of that pie. And he says, and I'll comment on this too, this will be a big fight internationally, especially if New Zealand is in front of the rest of the world getting back to normality. You have 2 top 10 heavyweights in the world, so you would think the commercials would work out well for both sides. Joseph, from what I have read, makes $2 million a fight, so why would they expect Junior Farr to fight for a couple of $100,000? Junior needs a reasonable payday as well. He also has a family to feed. So I'll jump in there again. This talk that it's going to be this big international fight, I think is certainly overstated. It might have some more exposure within the Pacific Islands and Australia, but further afield, no one is really checking for this fight. So I think that to say it's going to be a massive fight internationally, a big fight internationally, as he said, is probably maybe stretching it a bit. There's going to be some interest, but it's not one that everyone is going, well, we just have to have this fight. It's not that sort of fight, not yet. A lot of people are saying that they would prefer Parker to be in other fights than facing Junior Farr when the lockdown is lifted. And he talks about 2 top 10 heavyweights in the world, and obviously that needs some context around it. So Junior Farr is ranked within the WBO and also IBF now actually, but he's number 6 in the WBO. So this is where he's saying 2 top 10 heavyweights. That's within a sanctioning body. But the reality is Junior Farr is somewhere around top 50 level at the moment. And I think on BoxRec he's somewhere around there or thereabouts. But in terms of why would Joseph Parker get the money that he's getting and Junior Farr just fight for a couple of $100,000, which is what Cadell doesn't want to happen. The thing is there, Joseph Parker is the attraction in this fight. He's the guy that people know around the world, especially in New Zealand. Junior Farr, not yet a household name. Doesn't mean he can't be, but his record is such that he doesn't really have a lot of meat on the bones yet. So it's not like we can sort of point to something to sort of go, well, he's an elite level fighter at this point, that he deserves a massive payday. Parker has actually been there, done that, got the postcard. And sure, he's lost a couple of fights and he's had a number of tune-ups, but he's still managed to secure himself a deal where he's getting relatively well paid by DAZN and Matchroom. And the thing is, with this fight, Junior Farr is being brought in to be the opponent. So he's not the guy with the name recognition. He's not the A-side. He's not the guy with the record that sort of says that he should be deserving 50-50 or even $1 million, regardless if Parker got $2 million. And I get what he's saying, that, Farr has a family to feed and, everyone wants to make as much as impossible as boxing. We all know that. But there is commercial realities too with this. But I do think the talk about, because of the whole coronavirus thing, there's a lot of speculation there as well, because who's to say that New Zealand will actually open big events up anytime soon? From what I am reading and hearing from what is being put out by the New Zealand government, we're still some considerable time away from that. And these guys aren't going to be fighting in a studio or anything like that. I don't think that's going to be the case. You would need to have a crowd. You need to get the gate revenue too. That's what's going to help recoup some of the money that's going to pay these fighters. And as I mentioned in a previous video, you'd need astronomical pay-per-view buys to actually make this a viable event, especially considering some of the numbers that are flying around in terms of purses, not to mention the cut of the broadcaster that would put it on pay-per-view. And if it was on DAZN, for example, which is not pay-per-view but a subscription service, flat fee, you'd need to have a lot of subscribers coming in. You'd need to be selling a lot of rights around the world just to break even. And at this point, with the numbers that are being mentioned, it's not going to happen. It's just, what's being talked about seems very pie in the sky. So before I get to another story where we have Higgins responding to Junior Farr and his manager Mark Cadell, Junior Farr says in this article, heck yeah, I want that fight. It's a business and there's a lot of things going on with this and that, but I know Joseph is keen, I know I am, so hopefully the other stuff gets sorted. It's very frustrating, but I guess that's part of the sport at a professional level. There is money involved and that changes the game completely. I trust my team that they'll do what's right for me from a financial standpoint. We will come to an agreement if both sides are willing to work things out. It will happen. I can't wait to face him. And Farr believes he holds a psychological advantage over Parker from their 2-2 split in the amateurs. He says, if you were there and saw the fights, you would think it was 4-0 to me. I believe, and I know he knows, I beat him 4 times. It happened a long time ago, but I know he thinks I have his number. He will have doubts and try to dust it off, but he knows I've got him, and that will play in his head. So that is Junior Farr. And this is what I was talking about at the opening of the video, that this is the sort of stuff that Junior Farr needs to say to build the rivalry. There's a little bit of edge there. He's really taking a bit of a dig at Parker. And if he's going to build this fight, because I don't think it's going to happen next, I think it's more a couple of years away. It's still got some building to do. But this is the sort of stuff and needle that Junior Farr needs to be coming out, regularly within the media, to help build and bubble that fight along to an eventual place we can make that fight. But as I said, I don't think it's going to get made right now, and neither does David Higgins. So in this other articles, Higgins responding to Team Farr, they're pricing themselves out, asking for nearly $1 million in the middle of a lockdown. It's silly, and Joseph isn't taking it seriously. We're going to end these discussions now because they don't realistically want the fight. If they do, they know who we are, but they need to be realistic with their financial demands. And then Higgins, he goes on to take a bit of a pot shot at Mark Cadell, which is possibly a little bit low. He says, Mark is a former pub owner who was doing a bit of boxing stuff as a hobby. He knows I've been looking after Joseph since day one, and he became the 4th youngest ever champion, and he set up his family for life, so I must be doing something right. That's just silly stuff. They don't want anything to do with Joseph Parker. It's just gamesmanship. The fight is there if they want it, but they don't. I don't think the Farr team are being realistic about the money. What they're asking for is astronomical. Junior Farr is asking for more money than Joseph Parker. So you can clearly see Higgins' position there that, they're not going to entertain the sort of money that's being talked about. But he says there that Farr is asking for more money than Joseph Parker. So is Parker willing to take the fight for less than $1 million? That seems to be the inference. And I guess if, say, for example, he took $800,000, would Junior Farr take $400,000, being that's 2/3 to 1/3? That would seemingly be a more realistic thing to ask for. But in this, day and age with the rights, the money that's involved in boxing, they will try to screw Junior Farr and Mark Cadell down to as little as possible. They'll want to make it that, they don't really have any idea what's in the pot. They want them to take a flat fee and be happy with that. So I can see both sides of this argument. It's boxing after all. Money is the root of all evil. It makes fights happen. It also makes fights not happen. Yeah, so this one here, Junior Farr's right to an extent. Joseph Parker does need him, but only to the extent if Parker wants that interim fight before, as he puts it, a big fight. He's looking for that step between the competition that he's facing and a big fight at the end of the year or whenever it would be. And seemingly, they would like Junior Farr to be that intermediary step. Not sure it's going to happen with the money that's being talked about, but we'll see. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.